Matt and I are here again today to talk about Piranesi, or rather, I should say, we are here to use Piranesi as a jumping off point for philosophical discussions about topics of interest to us. So if you're here for a book review, you're not going to get that. But we are going to talk about the book in some detail because it's really a fascinating book, and what she writes and what she leaves out are equally fascinating. So when we left off, we were on, in my edition, we were on page 7. I don't know about your edition. A list of all the people who have ever lived and what is known of them. And he starts out with this evocative sentence. Since the world began, it is certain that there have existed 15 people. Possibly there have been more, but I am a scientist and must proceed according to the evidence. Of the 15 people whose existence is verifiable, only myself and the other are now living. And then he goes on to name the 15 people. And he names himself first, which we already talked about. He's 35 and 1.83 meters tall and of a slender build. The second person is the other. He's slightly taller, also slender, strong and fit, with pale olive skin, short hair, mustache. I'm not reading now, I'm just paraphrasing, because we did talk about this part already. Also a scientist, and someone who has an idea that he could find a knowledge hidden somewhere in the world that will grant him enormous power. And so you get this idea of the other kind of looking at Piranesi as a protege of some type, or as an assistant, maybe the sorcerer's assistant or something. Piranesi certainly looks up to, or seems to look up to, the other with some admiration. And they meet together once a week, twice a week, to search diligently for the knowledge. And that brings us to the third person, who is the Biscuit Box Man. That's on page 9. Now, would you like to read that paragraph about the Biscuit Box Man?
Sure. The Biscuit Box Man is a skeleton that resides in an empty niche in the third northwestern hall. In a particular way, the bones have been ordered. Long ones, similar in size, collected, tied together with twine made from seaweed. To the right is placed the skull. To the left, a biscuit box containing all the small bones, fingers, toes, vertebra, etc. The biscuit box is red. It has a picture of biscuits and bears the legend, Huntley Palmer's and family circle. When I discovered this thing, the seaweed twine had dried up and fallen apart, and he, suppose the skeleton, had become rather untidy. So I made new twine, tied up the bundles of bones again. The twine was from fish leather. Now he is in good order once again.
So what did you think about when you read that?
So that literary technique we talked about in the second video, responsion, where you ask yourself, all right, let's say it's 80,000 words. How will I divide it up into intelligible paragraphs or intelligible units that can stand apart from each other in relief and then make conversation with each other on a higher level than line by line? Because if it's 80,000 unbroken words, that's one unbroken monologue. But if you can break apart 80,000 words into a finite number of units, and establish some rule whereby they can communicate with each other past other units, now you have a sort of hyperlinked, augmented level of reality that then filters down into whatever particular unit you're giving attention to. And this allows for the experience of remembering what you have read and what it might mean now in light of what you are reading. So, and often that is done, the cutting off of those little units, by exact phrasing. So in the Bible, you will know them by their fruits. Then Jesus talks about the wolf in sheep's clothing. Then he says, you will know them by their fruits. So this is a unit of composition bracketed by this proposition, you will know them by their fruits. That can mean an indefinite number of things as a standalone phrase. But those two exact phrasings couch his tropes, his turn to the wolf in sheep's clothing, to the kind of fruit that bears a fig versus the other kind of fruit that bears thorns. And those are to be understood not as standalone pretty images, but as buttressing evidentially the exact phrasing, which is the beginning and the end of the thought. Now you can take that as a sort of necklace and wear it as you're walking through the rest of the Bible, all the way to Revelation, and say, where else in the Bible, where else in tradition, where else in other authors is this unit maybe commented upon, directly or indirectly? Does someone else, somewhere else, say something about recognizing effects from cause? And you can have a field day with responsium. So this, in closing, this thing about the skeleton, I think, is a responsium to that earlier part where we just read about the other and this young man trying to see what the other is, what each other is there for. I mean, in one sense, they're like two literary characters stuck in a bunker at the end of the world. They're all they have. So they have to make do with life together. But then the second question is, that's sort of like any friendship or romantic relationship where you're voluntarily, in this case differently, stuck together, choosing to be stuck together. So now what's left? Is there anything more to explore about the other? And how do you go about that? What's the etiquette? What questions? When do I repeat myself? It's sort of like developing a responsian array for that friendship to be explored in. You see when like that array, the columns in the array, and moving through that?
Mm-hmm.
And then how science in the exploration for truth and moving only according to evidence is sort of subject to that presuppositional activity.
Wow. So much packed in there. Well, when you first started talking, you were saying that in responsia, the paragraphs sort of make conversation with one another in an intelligible way to communicate with each other past a certain point, right? And when you were talking about that, I immediately thought of years ago when I was more fully involved with a lot of other artists. And I was doing art shows many times a year. And I was involved with an art group that did art shows together. And when you're doing an art exhibit and you have a judge determines, first and second, third prize and so forth, before the judge can come in and determine which paintings get the prizes, you have to have what's called a hanging. Now, hanging is when you hang the paintings up on the wall in the exhibit space. And you might think, oh, that's a simple process. You just take a hammer and nails and hang them up so that they all go along in a line in the space. And so I was tasked with heading up some of the hangings, and I learned from a master. And then I developed my own ideas as I went along. But one of the things that I learned is context is all important about where you hang a painting. Because since we were an amateur group, there were some paintings that were quite brilliant, but there were other paintings that were, let's say, beginner quality. And you want to give every painting an opportunity to shine. You want to give it its best opportunity. So There's several things you have to think about when you're hanging a show. One of them is you want a conversation to go on amongst the paintings. So that when you look at, if you come into the exhibit space and you look at the wall, you want the viewer to have a reason to follow the trail. They'll see little things repeated periodically around the room, maybe paintings that have a little touch of red. Every fourth painting or so will have a little touch of red, and that little touch of red will get people moving down the row. So it's like this responsion, right? But then you also want every painting to show at its very best, which means that sometimes you can put two paintings together and the brilliant painting will look mediocre. Well, how did that happen? It's a brilliant painting. Or sometimes you put two paintings together and the sort of beginner quality painting will look just terrible. But if you put the right painting next to the right painting, they both look brilliant. Now, I don't know what it is that makes that happen, but when you get it accomplished, you can see it. So doing a hanging is a matter of, first of all, trying to come up with the responsion. You get all the paintings kind of distributed in the room according to the responsion variety. But then you have to start shuffling and looking at one painting next to another, and make sure that every painting gets its best opportunity to shine. So it's a little bit like building relationships in a community, right? You want every person to have an opportunity to flourish. And so when you said that about the paragraphs in a book, it's very much like that. It's as you go along, you can kind of keep the thread going because of these little connections that are made. But then as the little connections are made, it also helps you to think back to where you were and get a deeper layer of meaning from that, right? And then that's very much like the way life is and the experiences that we have. And some experiences will go back and rewrite other experiences. And so it made me think about a lot of things.
It's something to that. Today I was writing in response to the conversation between Jordan Peterson and Richard Dawkins. And in the heart of their conversation, right at the 40-some minute mark, or maybe hour, 10-minute mark, one of them was putting their finger on the question whether or not there is an external world. And this is a perennial problem in philosophy. And since the Enlightenment, up through German idealism, now into the analytic philosophy of linguistic analysis in the US, because a lot of philosophy now happens within the US as treatment of logical formulae, where the concern is, I don't care what it is that we stipulate with the property existence, but I want to know what it quantifies over. Fine, it exists, but how does it range? What is its extension? To how many things can I, through it, refer to? And so I love that phrase, the hanging, with the hanging of the objects in space, we are entitled to the representations thereof. But what we're not entitled to as spectators is the rule invisible in the room as to how those representations were sequenced. If we want to leave the room and think about what the rule might be, and then if we want to sort of hang our hats on the philosophical enterprise itself, we might ask the third level question, where could such a rule that we theoretically have identified for the sequencing of those objects in space, where does that rule come from? And Peterson, as Peterson often does, says very pregnant things and then moves on because he has a lot to say and he's doing magnificent work, in my opinion. But the one thing he said, which made me pause, is this. there is genuine redundancy in the external world. I thought, that sounds like a well-chosen phrase. What does the word redundancy mean again? So I went to Google and found the Latin. When you look through Google, you'll find the word synonyms, and then you'll find the word in different parts of speech. But the real gold, in my opinion, underneath all the water of transition, when you're panning for the conceptual meeting place of a lexical, of a language, you want to go underneath the stream, underneath the foam, underneath the fish swimming, doing what they do. You want to go right to the bottom where you can begin to pan it. Click that bottom arrow in a word search at Google, and it'll give you the translation. It'll give you that nice little flow chart of the ancient language through its modern usage by a catalytic language. So in this case, it was the Latin redundare, and then the English catalytic turn on it. That then brings us to the word redundancy, as some scientists use it. The catalytic word in English, you'll hear in some Puritan ministers in famous speeches, in famous sermons. I think one or two Jonathan Edwards will use this word, redound. So the glory of God redounds from a flower in a forest. In other words, and this goes now to the Latin origin of the word, which has been transmuted a little bit with English to redound. Redundare literally means a surging up. So redundancy is surging up. The thing, yeah.
Wow.
So that
Because
sounds like
I usually think of redundancy in terms of mechanical systems, where it's very important that the mechanical system be able to run 24/7. They build in redundancy so that if anything goes wrong with one part of the system, the other part of the system that's redundant, that's an extra, a duplicate or a copy, will kick in. And so there's a lot of redundancy built into our brains. If some part of the brain is damaged, there will be pathways that can bypass that damage, and those pathways can rewire to a certain extent and overcome the damage. Or in your body, if a blood vessel gets blocked, the body has redundancies in blood vessels that can circumvent that sometimes and get around it. Redundancy is built into a lot of things to protect the coherence and the continuation of the process. But this idea of it being a surging up, it's like a enthusiastic overabundance of everything, right? Kind of this like, that's a beautiful picture.
And so then, and I love that Peterson brought this to Dawkins. So I don't mean to make this whole thing about a podcast with Peterson and Dawkins. Just as a side note.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, he brought it to the man who is a foremost expositor or exegete of the Darwinian theory of speciation and division by types in the struggle for existence. He brings to this man the Latin roots of redundancy. It's great. In terms of a responsium, right? One of the reasons, we have to pinch ourselves. Our grandfathers, our great-grandfathers, considered education to be immersion in the classical languages. But not just classical languages for artsy-fartsy sake of knowing multiple languages and being n-lingual, however many linguals, but to go into the mechanistic turns of possibility available in a language that inflects differently than English. I was talking to my friend this morning over coffee, but before I do that, I'm going to read the rest of this. What are the necessary and sufficient conditions for the possibility of the redundant? It's like the third level question. And how does this question relate to the etymological meaning of adumbrate? Another Latin word, when the word means to increase the shade. So redundancy is an upsurging, and adumbrate. You'll hear sometimes people say, oh yeah, let's adumbrate the concept. And it's a fancy word, but what does it actually mean? the AD there, when you go into Google and you find your word and you click that down arrow, remember, go to the translation. That's the fun part. And get in the weeds of a language. That's because languages build, especially morphological languages like Latin. When I was having coffee with my friend, he and I were talking about the difference between English, such as it is. It's a fine language. It's a wonderful language. It's a breezy language. English is syntactic. It's very easy to breeze through and read quickly. It's ideal for news. And it just picks up so many things like a snowball along its way. So you can read an English sentence and it's written in syntactic English. But then you'll find loaned words borrowed from other languages that are themselves morphological, right? That have the case built into them, but they're stamped onto the sequence of an English breezy sentence where all the parts of speech, the cases that the word is operating in as a verb or an object or a subject, all that's flattened out in English. The cat is on the mat. The cat yawns on the mat. You have the nominative, the cat, yawns the accusative. And sometimes we forget that in the accusative case, the end of the verb, the end of the yawn, ends with the cat, ends with the nominative. It never goes beyond it. So the connection between logic and grammar, the ancients knew it, and we should know it. So when the cat yawns on the mat, the nominative and accusative meet in the cat yawning itself. Now that can sound very highfalutin philosophical language. Yes, the cat yawns itself. The yawning emits and ends in the cat. All I'm doing is speaking a grammatical sentence. And that's all philosophy. I don't want to say that's all philosophy does, but that's part and parcel of what philosophy as an exercise amounts to, is it takes seriously the possibilities of grammar and dwells in those possibilities. It hangs certain cases in such a way that you go on a journey of reflective discovery. So when the cat yawns, the action of the verb is in the nominative and never goes beyond the yawn of the cat. But when it yawns on the mat, the dative case on the mat or in the mat completely contextualizes the activity of the cat, the yawning itself, such that it's nowhere else. In a different language like Latin, none of that would be so flatly spread out. On the mat, yawns, the cat. You would have a closer relationship of the agent, the action, and where the action is occurring, where it's not occurring over time. And that, because the words at their endings show you where the case is. And then when the way you arrange those words gives emphasis to the case. So these ancient languages like Greek and Latin, when they're composed and when they're read, and they cannot be read apart from the thinking through the building of that structure. The cat yawns on the mat. I can say it quickly, but if I had to translate it into Latin, I would literally have to show on the page the building of the activity in that place. So you would not be able to divorce the thinking hyphen building from the words. So the last thing with the adumbrate and the redundant, that word adumbrate, the AD at the beginning just intensifies, like object, the OB intensifies the thing thrown. Object is an intensified throne. It's right there. It's in your face. It's in the dative. But the adumbrate, it intensifies the umbra, which is a shade and a multiple shading. So like when you stand under a tree, you not only see the light through the leaves, but you see multiple shades underneath the branches and the twigs. And all of light, which is so simple, is adumbrated down to the person sitting at the roots of the tree looking up. So the upsurging is met by a desire to adumbrate it out. And I think that's in the responsing. The existence of the world and the partitioning of differences is met with this desire to separate it out and let it filter down And I think that's achieved partly through a responsium. For order,
Wow.
right? The order.
I hope you go back through this video and type up what you just said and put that in your writings, because that was really, really good. Because I've been thinking about these kinds of things a lot, but I would never be able to phrase it the way you did. Yesterday, I was looking at the word good, and I stumbled across this really interesting article online, which I'll put in the show notes, that talks about the 4 different words for good that are used in the scripture, in the Greek, in the New Testament, which really, I mean, I don't understand why our translators would collapse everything down into one word, good, in the English, when these 4 different meanings are very, very precise and really enrich your thinking about what Jesus is talking about when he talks about the good. So when Jesus is using all these various words to describe good, he's adumbrating the light, right? And then this morning, I was thinking about purpose. Well, I was looking at the word influence in the New Testament, and that led me to thinking about purpose, because one of the words, one of the telos words, there's actually 6 or 7 words that spring out of the idea of telos, the spelling of telos in Greek. Anybody who's a Strong's person, they start with 5047 and they go up to 5055. And each of them has a shade, very precise shade of meaning. And that also adumbrates your understanding of telos. And then to see how each of those is used in scripture greatly enhances our understanding of what it means to be rising towards this purpose. You know, the redounding, you know, in some way, the redounding and the adumbrating together sort of lead to a kind of refining that is leading us up towards this ultimate light, or this ultimate good, or the precise fittedness to which we are called, right? So, yeah, that's great.
Would you mind? Well, if you want to outline the 4 types of good, that would be cool.
No, I'm going to put it in
I see.
We'll get so far afield, but I'll put it in the show notes, and that way everybody will have it.
So the skeleton.
One thing I wanted to say about the Biscuit Box Man was
yes,
that
please.
One thing that is very clear there is that, at least for Piranesi, there is a deep reverence for the sacred nature of person, right?
Mm-hmm.
So then what were you going to say?
No, I was sitting in what you said about the person and the use of that word, because it struck me. 2 things struck me: where I was coming from, and then when you said that, where I now want to go with it. So first, where I was coming from, the skeleton is a subject of discourse that can be read at different shadings. So someone who edits books, or someone who solicits advice for how to develop an idea in writing at a high level, not necessarily is there a typo here or there, but is this plot going somewhere? Will it turn at the right place? Are there a sufficient number of beats to call this the genre of romance or adventure or thriller or techno-thriller? They will often refer to the skeleton of a piece. They won't refer to the sinews, the muscles, the blood flow, all these other systems that superattend the underlying framework, because they don't have to. Those are details for other experts to handle. There are other layers. But the skeleton is the last thing to decay. Maybe not scientifically, but it's certainly the last thing popular imagination equates with the process of decay. And here is a thing found, held together, and supported by this living being. And then it's paired with a token, possibly, of that skeleton's former life. But then when you said person, I thought, yeah, what is a person? And in this corner of the internet, we often talk about the shades of personhood. And obviously in the Latin, it just means the sound through. That's all it means, the personar, like sonar. And we interpret that as a mask, but it doesn't have to be a mask. A flute could be a person just as well as a mask that someone's wearing and speaking through. Someone behind your back talking is a person, right? Or it could be gossip, or it could be that. All that's higher level interpretations. But a person in the Latin is just a sound through. Could be breeze between twigs. What are other things that we think we mean when we say person? Well, philosophically, the word that has received the most lint to it, that's stuck in the pocket of people's go-to vocabulary, was substance, the thing that stands under. Mm-hmm. So I wonder, were you seeing?
That's what jumped into my head immediately. Yeah.
Yeah.
When you said that about skeleton, and then you said they never talk, the editors never talk about the muscles or sinews or any of that. And then immediately jumped into my mind the verse that I was just reading this morning, that it's the muscles and sinews that hold all things, that hold the body together. It's talking about the body of Christ, in terms of all the people that make up the body of Christ. And then it's using this image of the muscles and sinews holding all things together. And then I thought about your skeleton and how in the book here, the skeleton has come apart because the skeleton is a starting point. The skeleton is the thing hoped for, but without the faith, there's no substance, right? The substance is what comes in and holds the thing together. So a person can be just a sound through thing, right? Your Latin meaning of person, but there needs to also be identity. There needs to also be substance to the person, and it's that identity that is not anything that can be named in the material world, right? And what is it that binds that skeleton together to create an identity? That's the mysterious part, right? That's the
and Piranesi's desire to protect it at this moment. To, what does the author say? I made new twine from fish leather and tied up as bundles of bones again. I mean, you even hear in that sentence the tumbling of repetition. You take a ball and you're at the top of a staircase and you drop it, and the thing miraculously, parabolically drops again and again at deeper and deeper levels until it's at the bottom with this she captures that with onomatopoeia in this sentence. I mean, listen for it. Listen for the I made new twine from fish leather and tied up as bundles of bones again. Bundles of bones again. It's great love on the part of Piranesi. And there's this motif that you find often in stories, especially modern stories, especially stories written after New Hollywood. And this is in the book Saving the Cat, which is a sort of text for the popular bones thrown out into the marketplace of how to make beats sing in a story one might write for a popular, or let's just say a wide audience. people who may not share the same cultural background, but those beats, man, they just happens at the right time. It's my sort of thing. To get more people than not to say that and to feel that and respond to the work. This book, Saving the Cat, will stipulates that to have a character that the audience, whoever the audience happens to be, typically will identify with, find themselves relating to, is someone who, when walking down the street and they see a cat hanging from a storm drain, they'll stand under and catch it. Oh, that's good to know. They care for animals. They'll go out of their way to save the underdog. Once I've seen that, and I know that character might do it again, then yeah, throw them to the wolves, show their inner demons, let them, drive crazy and backstab people. I won't forget through all of those hangings of marks against that he stood under the storm drain to catch that cat. So that when later he does turn a new leaf and say to that person who's in need of help, I will sacrifice my needs and wants to help you, even if I don't know why. The audience can say, well, I know why, because you're a good person who will catch a cat under a storm drain. And Aristotle said that's exactly what an audience wants. They want to know a little bit more than the main character, because then we feel like we're being educated into our own possibilities. Maybe I will stand under a storm drain. This is a very sophisticated novel. I would submit the skeleton and making new twine from fish leather and tying up his bundles of bones again is Saving the Cat for Piranesi. We're supposed to identify with someone that is good. May not be in a good place, but he is good.
Oh, that's really great. And you're exactly right. Since I've read the book 3 times and you're only on chapter 2, I can tell you that's exactly right. The fourth person is the concealed person. One day, 3 years ago, I climbed the staircase in the 13th vestibule, finding that the clouds had departed from this region and that they were bright, clear, and filled with sunlight. I determined to explore further. So in one of the halls, the one positioned directly above the 18th northeastern hall, I love how precise he always is, I found a half-collapsed skeleton wedged in a narrow space between a plinth and the wall. So then he finds that from the way that the bones were displayed in this narrow place, he feels like it was originally in a sitting position with the knees drawn up to the chin. And he has not been able to determine the gender of that person because he figured if I took the bones out of the space, I would never be able to get them back in, which all of these things are very mysterious to me because on the one hand, you have this, if you just took it at face value, there's this very primitive person who's living in this very primitive environment and wouldn't have any reason to know anything beyond his own primitive environment. And yet he has an intuition that if he examined these bones, he could tell whether it was male or female. I just think that's really fascinating. Then he goes on, persons 5 to 14, the people of the alcove. The people of the alcove are all skeletal. Their bones are laid side by side on an empty plinth in the northernmost alcove of the 14th southwestern hall. I've tentatively identified 3 of those skeletons as female and 3 as male, and 4 whose gender I cannot determine with any certainty. One of these I have named the fish leather man. His skeleton is or I guess this one is indeterminate. The skeleton is incomplete and many of the bones are much worn away by the tides, some scarcely more than pebbles of bone, with small holes bored in the ends and fragments of fish leather. From this, I draw several conclusions. He really is a scientist at heart, right? He's always observing and drawing conclusions. The skeleton of the fish leather man is older than the others. The skeleton of the fish leather man was once displayed differently, its bones threaded together with thongs of fish leather. And the people who came after the fish leather man, presumably the people of the alcove, held human life in such reverence that they patiently collected his bones and laid him with their own dead. So he asks himself a question. He says, when I feel myself about to die, ought I to go and lie down with the people of the alcove? There is, I estimate, space for 4 more adults. Though I am a young man, and the day of my death is, I hope, some way off, I have given this matter some thought.
So the problem of the is and the ought has been with us since David Hume. And Schelling called it an ugly ditch. That long, extensive ridge and edge of all the things we can measure and throw rulers at and speak of, versus all the things we can hope to speak of, that we can feel intensely and might even wish to someday know empirically. But there is no bridge so far as we can see. We may believe, but if someone were to say, if I push you off the empirical edge, do you think there will be some angel underneath to catch you up so you don't dash your foot against a stone and go to that promised land of wished for hope? This was a problem in the 17 and 1800s. It's still with us in science, right? The is ought. Can science not only discover what is, but discover what ought to be? He's talking about, well, this one is a little bit more like a pebble than the others. Therefore, I determine by empirical grounds, he's older chronologically than the others, and so on, but not so much so forth. But often with writing, you find those roses among thorns. You have this sort of monotonic, yep, we're just measuring things, we're just going along, telling you how long, how wide the bones are, what I found. And then suddenly there's this upsurge of something totally different in that context, which is begging us to pay more attention to it than everything else. It's what we've been prepared for. That's that number 3, where he says, and I don't know how you could derive this empirically, the people who came after the fish leather man held human life in such reverence. That's aspirational, right? That's him reading into the data.
Anthropologists don't seem to be the least bit afraid to do that, though. On the one hand, they call themselves complete materialists, and they think that cultures just arose as a matter of quarks and gluons. And yet they're perfectly satisfied to say things like this as though it's self-evident, right? It doesn't require any sort of a leap.
No, they're in their domain. And notice the third move, after aspirationally hypothesizing that these people of the past held human life with such reverence, he then inserts himself in their story imaginatively with a what if. I estimate, or no, excuse me. Oh yeah, when I feel myself about to die, ought I to go and lie down with the people of the alcove? I mean, this is not something that the length of the bone, which is like a pebble by the shore, is screaming out for him to conclude. But yet he asks himself the question on the premise of this aspirational desire. It's as if he needs these people to hold life in such reverence, so that he can then ask himself, well, when times come for me to die and I can no longer count the tides, will I be with them? Or will I be like I am now, haunting these halls with statues, making notes?
Well, and the interesting thing is, right, he in some way, he's making no presumptions about where those people came from, and he's not asking any questions about where he came from. It's as though he just exists in this world about which he knows nothing, really. He's making a few insights like that, but otherwise he really doesn't know anything, and he's not doesn't seem to be asking himself questions about how he happened to arise there, which is very scientific.
And he's charming, to use a word they used in a past video on this subject. It endears me to him.
Yes.
It's almost like I haven't read Robinson Crusoe, but there's this element of this book so far is blending the adventure romance, where a hero goes on episodic adventures and meets people and gets into fights and then moves past them and then goes on and on and on and on and on. A detective series can do this, where it's a new case every book in the same city. That's the adventure romance. Instead of a new town, a new feudal lord, there's a new case. This book, it's similar. There's a new corner, northwest, not southeast, that he goes to, but it's not a thriving town, a new thriving town. It's skeletons, and it's his notes. But you're right. He doesn't indulge in despair. Oh, I'm so lonely. I'm traumatized. But he also doesn't indulge in, well, maybe I'm here because I'm supposed to tell these bones to receive flesh and come up and live again. He's just exploring the house.
Yeah.
Making notes. It's very charming.
Yeah. When we get to the journals, we're gonna see some of those things arise. Okay. Then the 15th person is the folded up child, a skeleton I believe to be female and approximately 7 years of age. She is posed on an empty plinth in the 6th southeastern hall. Her knees are drawn up to her chin, her arms clasp her knees, her head is bowed down. There is a necklace of coral beads and fish bones around her neck. I have given a great deal of thought to this child's relationship to me. There are living in the world, as I have already explained, only myself and the other, and we are both male. How will the world have an inhabitant when we are dead? It is my belief that the world, or if you will, the house, since the two are for all practical purposes identical, love that sentence, wishes an inhabitant for itself, to be a witness to its beauty and the recipient of its mercies. I have postulated that the house intended the folded up child to be my wife, only something happened to prevent it. Ever since I had this thought, it has seemed only right to share with her what I have. I visit all the dead, but particularly the folded up child. I bring them food, water, and water lilies from the drowned halls. I speak to them, telling them what I've been doing, and I describe any wonders that I have seen in the house. In this way, they know that they are not alone. Only I do this. The other does not. As far as I know, he has no religious practices.
Came out and said it. I mean, Piranesi came out and said it. Religious practices.
So in my margin notes, I wrote, his religious practice keeps him sane. Mm. It made me think about Jordan Peterson and the way he talks about how we outsource our sanity. So in some way, he's outsourcing his sanity not only to the other, which might be far too limiting a place to outsource his sanity, because if there's only one other, and if that person happens to be off, you're not going to keep your sanity right. But he's outsourcing his sanity by talking to the dead.
Yes.
Maybe talking to the saints, maybe talking to those who have gone before, right? He's outsourcing his sanity by tending to them and visiting them and sharing his food with them. They are giving him an opportunity to learn the province of sacrifice and the way to serve others, so that even though he doesn't have a human person with whom he can have this experience, he has these people who have gone before with whom he can have this experience. And that way he will not degenerate into nihilism and selfishness.
I love how you use the word province. It made me think of the restaurant I worked in when I was living in California. We had a wine cellar on call, and he came, and in his, he's a lovely man, in his desire to build us up into wine connoisseurs that could explain the preciousness of his precious bottles, so that we could see, taste, and then tell what was going on behind those glasses. He used as a key responsium to connect all the bottles from all the vintages, from all the places, and all the times, provenance. And your use of provenance in relation to sacrifice led me to say to myself, yeah, because in a misconstrual of self-sacrifice, a cynic might say, well, then why doesn't everyone kill themselves immediately? For the greater good, end it now. Or by this, what is the same token, why are we having this conversation? I should go outside and give all my money to anyone I see for no reason at all that I can determine, and then live under a bridge and wait, because certainly this room I'm in is taken from somebody. That would be hard to countervene if self-consciousness was not the whole story. If self-consciousness was the whole story, then I would have to answer that question every minute of my life, explicitly. But if self-consciousness isn't the whole story, then I can not have the answer and not need to have the answer. But this was a problem, especially after Kant. Immanuel Kant, with his book, The Critique of Pure Reason, set forward a new paradigm that made an earthquake that we're still feeling the tremors of intellectually. And in some way, we have to give an account for it as not the elephant in the room, but the ripple in the room, as an earthquake gives. We may not want to acknowledge this every 5 minutes or so in our aspirations, in our walking, in our talking, in our appreciation of those hangings on the wall. Every 5 minutes, philosophically speaking, there's a to everything. And that's Kant. And that was Kant in the Critique of Pure Reason stipulating what we mean by concept and what we mean by understanding is the following. You do not see the dative case. So I walk on the sidewalk. It's like the cat yawning on the mat. In English, the accusative is hidden, but it's really there. I walk myself on the sidewalk. That's really what's going on in relation between the verb walk and I. I am walking myself. The walking never bleeds out onto the sidewalk. Never, metaphysically. And the English captures it. I walk myself. You wouldn't even have to say I walk on the sidewalk. You could erase the dative on the sidewalk. I walk, period. Still would make the same sense because the verb ends with me walking. But when I say I walk on the sidewalk, I'm saying that the walking is only happening in this particular region of being and nowhere else. I've now created a few more stipulations that would have to obtain in the real world in order for that sentence to be true. So some people would say in order to be philosophically valid, this is what Descartes was doing with his radical doubt project, is eliminate the complexity, eliminate the cases, and go simply to the relationship between the nominative and the accusative. Just say, I think, period. That's all I can know. That's where thinking ends with me, because that's where walking ends.
So in other words, there's no aboutness.
Precisely.
Okay.
And aboutness in the dative case. Now, what Kant did, I was thinking to myself, man, how do I boil down what Kant did to my own mind as I'm rereading it? He did an amazing thing with grammar. He took the dative case and man, did he make it do a lot of lifting. Because he said famously, I'm mispronouncing it in the German, I'm sorry, Ding on sich. We cannot know the thing. So as I walk myself, I know the thing. The thing receives the action of knowing, and knowing ends with the thing. I know the thing. Kant said, I cannot know the thing in the dative. I cannot know the thing in itself, which is the same thing as saying, I cannot walk on the sidewalk. You see what I'm saying? It blew my mind when I understood that. Just
could we go back over this 1 second, because I'm almost there. There was a German word that you said that basically means I cannot know the thing, or
I think Ding on sich means thing in itself, something like that. The thing in itself.
What does that mean? I've read that over and over again in philosophical works, and I have no idea what they're talking about, because I don't think that way.
I don't pretend to know, but I'm offering a theory of what it might mean. Okay. This is the way I've been thinking about it for the last 2 weeks. Because I sat in this chair and I was trying to think through, what did Kant do to us with those earthquakes and the hangings? And he did something to us. And this is what I think so far he did to us. He warped the structure of our grammar, which then warped the structure of how we relate ourselves to ourselves and to the world at large. So the simple example, I walk on the sidewalk. English hides the accusative. I walk myself on the sidewalk. Because that sounds a little silly, but it's not silly, it's precise. I'm not walking the sidewalk. I walk myself on the sidewalk. Now, if I say, I cannot walk on the sidewalk, that means there's some barrier between me and the sidewalk. So I might have to walk on the street. That sentence, I cannot walk on the sidewalk. There may be other people who can walk on the sidewalk, but not I. Mm-hmm. Translate that to, I cannot know the thing in itself. It's the same thing. There's some barrier between
the thing and the self of the thing.
Exactly. So in itself is the same thing as saying on the sidewalk. All that matters is the case. That's what I want to say. All that matters is the case, not the content. One can forget the content. Just see what the philosopher is doing with the grammar. He's making a hanging of the grammar. So in the same way that I could walk myself on the sidewalk, unless there's a barrier that forbids me from walking on the sidewalk, the most important thing there is on the sidewalk. Kant said, I cannot know a thing in itself. The most important thing there is that dative in itself. So I cannot know you in you. In the same way that I cannot walk on the sidewalk. Why? Because there's construction going on the sidewalk and there are barricades.
Oh, wait. So he would reject the idea that all knowing is a participation in.
Yes, exactly. He could not abide by Peugeot's theology. Yes.
Well, I mean, it isn't just Peugeot's theology. I think that, maybe I came at this from a different direction, but if I think about all of Vervaeke's 4 Ps, they all collapse into participating in, if you're thinking about knowing as being a gift. That which is knowable is a gift from the creator. Then any knowing that we have is him participating in us and us participating in him. It can't be any other way. It has to be that way. So even a propositional knowing means that I have to allow that propositional knowing into my mind. So it's participating in my mind, it's participating in my thinking, it's participating in my being, that propositional thought that's rolling around in there. Procedural knowing, when I learn to do something, I'm inviting that thing in to participate in my muscle memory and all of those things, right? it's a participation in. And perspectival knowing is obviously a participation in, allowing it to see through me, allowing me to see through. I heard this thing yesterday in a message. I think it was maybe one of Bishop Barron's messages. It just blew my mind. I never thought about this in a million years. That when John laid his head against Jesus' breast, it was John attempting to see from the same vantage point that Jesus was seeing from, trying to see through Jesus's eyes.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah. Isn't that great?
That is beautiful.
So part of our leaning into Christ, wanting to grow close to him, is getting to the place where we can see through his eyes, and then let him become our eyes to see through us, right? So all of these aspects of knowing are a participation in. So to say I can't know the thing in itself is to say, first of all, that this thing has no substance. And second of all, there's no way that I could ever enter into the existence of this thing and try to gain an understanding of it at a more fundamental level, which is a profoundly anti-scientific thing to say, I think.
Well, perhaps, but I think one of the reasons one might be inclined to engage in that sort of preemptory halt to participation is the following. So that pen, I'll use the cup. I cannot know the cup in the cup. What have I done? Well, Kant would say, you experienced time and space. Really? I thought I experienced the cup in itself. No, that's the vulgar way to talk about it. You experience time and space. And that time and space can be measured. Every single ounce of it. Scientific. But to say the cup in itself, one might be tempted to speak about it as if it was my cup. I might speak of it as if it was the cup for something else. But that for something else, that dative case, that's teleological. That's purpose-driven. That's highly conjectural. That doesn't seem to be easily amenable to a scientific process. So we're going to bracket that away. And if you say it's your cup, why should I care? You can say that. I'm not going to scientifically inquire into the merits of that being or not being your cup. I don't even know how to begin doing that. And that's the problem. I wouldn't know how to begin doing that. But to say there's some fluid ounce in there that can be measured and might be turbulent as it reaches your lips, it might have some nutritive qualities or nutritive energies going down through such an organism as you are. I could spend the rest of my life on that field day. Mm-hmm. Always referring to parts, and parts with parts and more parts. In other words, continuing to say.
Oh, so it's an identity issue.
Continuing to say, I walk. I walk, I walk, I walk, I walk is the same thing as saying part A plus part B plus part C plus part D plus part F. I'd like to go a little bit higher level. Where am I walking to? What for? With whom? Stop it. Can't do that. I'm concerned with the parts here. We'll get around to that someday. It's putting the science before the human. Cart before the horse, the science before the dative case. To say the science can only be done by the scientist following a method is to say the yawning ends with the cat. The walking ends with the walker. I don't care if it's done on Pluto or on Earth, in heaven or in hell. That doesn't matter. That can't be scientifically corroborated. That isn't science. And in Kant's work, Prolegama to any future metaphysic, he was laying out the conditions for a philosophy to attain science. And it's very much the setting up of whatever we can actually do within our consciousness, that whether we like it or not, is held together by the hangings of time and space, things amenable to division, of labor, and also of division within numeric increments. It just so happens there's an infinite number of numbers, as well as an infinite number of things you can break apart and measure and put back together, not meaningfully, but measurably. And you can just continue measuring as you can continue walking. But when those people who want meaning in a meaning crisis say, well, where are you walking to? Where are you walking from? And with whom? You would say, none of the compass points of my needle in consciousness without the dative case get me there. They get me as far as the yawn, as far as the walking. It's very profound what he did with the dative case. Very profound. He denied the external world by saying we cannot know sidewalks in themselves, cups in themselves, the other in themselves, God, religion, experience, I mean, friendship, love. And philosophers after him have tried to take up what those earthquakes of, like when you feel like you're close to really knowing something real, participating in, then there's like this hiccup, this earthquake, this tremor of, oh, wait, but I can't say that because who am I? I don't know. I can only go as far as what I think I know. That's Kantian.
Well, so I guess some people have come along and tried to do something because I don't know if you remember the conversation that Jordan Peterson had with John Vervaeke, but they started talking about the cup and the idea of affordances. And I recently stumbled across affordances again in the work of James Gibson, because I was reading some of Wolfgang Smith's work, and he mentioned James Gibson on the ecology of perception, the ecology of vision, the ecology of seeing, something like that. This idea that there is a real world, that there is a substantial real world. So there is that little connection between Wolfgang Smith and John Vervaeke and James Gibson and his idea of affordances. So let's go on to the 16th person. I think I love this one. The 16th person is you. Who are you? Who is it that I am writing for? Are you a traveler who has cheated tides and crossed broken floors and derelict stairs to reach these halls? Or are you perhaps someone who inhabits my own halls long after I am dead? I really like that, because you mentioned one time, a long time ago, the idea of synchronic time and diachronic time. And that's also such a beautiful picture of this idea of a book or a library of books as being something that is synchronic and diachronic at the same time, because it goes all the way back to whenever that book was written. It has colonized minds and hearts all through time, and is at this current time colonizing minds and hearts, and we're all colonized together with the same ideas. And when we project out into the future, we will be connected to people in the future through the ideas in a book. I mean, the Bible is a good example, right? But I don't know if you wanted to say anything about that. There's just one more paragraph I wanted to cover before we finish. We've been at it for almost an hour and a half, but let's wrap that up a little bit. Did you want to say anything about the 16th person?
Yes. So she does a callback. When something is established in a literary text, and then you dribble away from it, or you drip away from it, still you have the droplets that remind you of the ocean that was. So then when you provide a river, you not only get the river, you get the droplet and the ocean compact into a river. What am I saying? Callbacks, they're everywhere. In the beginning of this book, the nouns were capitalized. In this paragraph, I know you cannot, reader or viewer, see it audibly, but visually, what she does to this unknown person past the fourth wall is she says these things in lowercase words, and then this through line right in the middle of the paragraph, she capitalizes almost every word and then comes out of it. And it's this wonderful, you get the sense of momentum, like a raging river with the power of the ocean because of the earlier pages in the book. So who are you? It's a powerful question. It also can be an impotent question. It can be bland if it's hit with the wrong note. But she hits the right note with this callback. Are you, repeating herself, a traveler? Well, what pace are you moving, traveler? She's about to give it with this callback. Who has cheated tides, capital T, crossed broken floors, capital BF, derelict stairs, capital DS, reached these halls, capital H. It's the author breaking through the fourth wall of her own construction to meet us. And it's powerful with that onrush because of the callback. That's all.
Yeah, she's a terrific writer. One wonders how much of this was completely intentional and how much of it is just flowing out of her authorial inspiration, wherever that might come from, you know? So the next section is called My Journals. And this is an entry for the 17th day of the 5th month in the year the albatross came to the southwestern halls. We're still in that year, the year the albatross came. So now we're going to learn a little bit about the journals. I write down what I observe in my notebooks. I do this for two reasons. The first is that writing inculcates habits of precision and carefulness. Now, Jordan Peterson would love that, right?
Yes.
The second is to preserve whatever knowledge I possess for you, the 16th person.
Dative case for you.
And now I'm completely engaged, right? Because this book is being written for me, personally. I keep my notebooks in a brown leather messenger bag. The bag is generally stored in a hollow place behind the statue of an angel caught on a rose bush in the northeastern corner of the second northern hall. This is also where I keep my watch, which I need on Tuesdays and Fridays when I go to meet the other at 10 o'clock. On other days, I try not to carry my watch for fear that seawater will get inside and damage the mechanism. Mm-hmm. Okay, so two things have erupted in this paragraph, right? One of them is technology has arrived in the house.
You're right.
Yes,
You're
right?
Yes.
There's a watch. Where did that watch come from? Wow. And the watch he's aware that the watch can get damaged if seawater gets inside the mechanism. That's a very sophisticated knowledge.
That's true.
And, but he keeps his watch stored in the same place that he keeps his messenger bag of brown leather, where the notebooks are stored, behind the statue of an angel caught on a rose bush. When I read that again today, I just went, oh my gosh, it's in the things that aren't said as much as the things that are said.
Say more.
An angel caught on a rose bush. What is the angel caught on? The angel is caught on a thorn.
Oh, yeah.
Caught on when you get caught on a rose bush. Right?
Of course, it's not the petals. Yeah.
And a thorn is a representative of suffering. In the New Testament, when Paul talks about his thorn in the flesh and how he prays again and again to have it taken away, the crown of thorns on Christ's head. And that verse came to mind, which I didn't have time to look up. Even angels long to look into these things.
Oh, yeah.
I heard a teaching about this once, that angels aren't capable of suffering. And one of the reasons that they're so interested in humanity is that they see what can be accomplished through suffering. And that's why they like to be with us and observe our lives, because they're so captivated by the beauty that can arise out of suffering. But that's all in that little phrase, an angel caught on a rose bush.
Yes. Yes. I also think it has a reference to William Blake. There's a poem called The Red Rose, and it has to do with locomotion and movement to a lover in a faraway place. And that's peripheral to what you said. What you said, to my mind, is more central to the paragraph than the reference to William Blake.
Well, I don't know if it is or not, but that's just what, that was just what leaped into my mind. Because I wish I knew more Blake. I greatly admire what little Blake I have read, but I have not read very much Blake. And I'm woefully deficient in classical literature and in the romantics and in philosophy and everything else.
Well, same here. I learn every day something new. I try to, at least. Mm-hmm. And you're, yeah. I mean, this, wow. I'm really just, I'm thinking about what you said, because I didn't catch that about the thorn. I was fixating on the bloom of the rose and the angel above. And I was thinking of the fact that inevitably the petals will fall. And there's this messenger above from the immaterial realm and the juxtaposition of the two. But with what you said, what you said is a finer interpretation, because it is the answer to the question of what is the angel caught on? That's the accusative. The angel is caught as the cat yawns. The angel is caught on what, though? The not stated, but the implied, the thorn. Gosh, it's so
well, we're about to get to the responsion.
Okay.
This is the really exciting part.
Okay.
It goes on and says, one of my notebooks is my table of tides. In it, I set down the times and volumes of high and low tides and make calculations of the tides to come. Another notebook is my catalog of statues. In the others, I keep my journal, in which I write my thoughts and memories and make a record of my days. So far, my journal has filled 9 notebooks. This is the 10th. All are numbered and most are labeled with the dates to which they refer. Number 1 is labeled December 2011 to June 2012. Number 2 is labeled June 2012 to November 2012. Number 3 was originally labeled November 2012, but this has been crossed out at some point and relabeled 30th day in the 12th month in the year of weeping and wailing, to the 4th day of the 7th month in the year I discovered the coral halls. So he was numbering his journals by calendar year. And at some point, calendar year was forgotten or became unimportant, or something changed, but the time that it changed was in the year of weeping and wailing. Suffering will do that. Suffering will cause you to forget a lot.
You're right. Is that the responsion?
That's what I was thinking. I mean, here's the thorn on the rose bush, and then 2 paragraphs later, we get the weeping and wailing of the.
I totally agree with you. And that can be amplified. The angel is a messenger. In the dative case, sent from, to, and then returns. The angel is like a great book, has a beginning, has an end, and the middle is its journey. And the thing about an angel is it goes to the human, and then it goes back to God. It relays up the ladder, down the ladder, etc. This man, Piranesi, he'll go to the northwest, and then he'll come back. And he'll go to the further out, and then he'll come back. And he comes back because he's a scientist. He has to come back to first principles. But he goes out because he's an explorer. So he's an angel of the modern era. Not by choice, but he's stuck. He happens to be in the house. And there's something charming and lovely about him, that he doesn't sit in the middle and ask himself, why should I go and explore? I'm alone. But he also doesn't say, well, why should I go back to my first premise? I'm alone. He's dutiful without a duty. He's dutiful without a lawgiver. And yet he's aspirationally preserving these skeletons as if there was a civilization where people would be their brother's keeper and look after one another and have plots of land beside each other, not in random space. The hangings were just right for each other. And so, very much like the secular world today, where we're not given an explicit order, and yet we try to act as if, some, others not, some a little more than, others having seasons where they do it. He's that angel above the rose, except now, like you said in Responsian, he's caught by a thorn, or was caught in that season of weeping and wailing that changed the way he measured time. He couldn't do it so innocently anymore, right? It couldn't just be a progression of next events. I don't know what you make of that. I mean, those are pretty deep words, weeping and wailing, and they're capitalized in text. So they're as permanent as the staircase or the statue.
Well, in the next year, see, the 12th month in the year of weeping and wailing, to the 4th day of the 7th month in the year, I discovered the coral halls. So it may be that after the year of weeping and wailing is when he begins to go out on the hero's journey to discover the other halls.
Mm.
So obviously we have much to learn yet from this book, but maybe we should stop here and pick it up next time we get together, because we're already at an hour and a half. I don't want to overextend our welcome with our viewers. There's so much rich stuff in here. So next time we could probably finish this chapter and get started on chapter 2, which gets more into his relationship with the other. Does that sound good?
That sounds good to me.
And I've been greatly enriched by this conversation today, Matthew.
Same here.
Thank you so much. I always learn so much from you, and you expand my mind and the way I think about things in such a great way.
Thank you again for curating and hanging the meaning code. Really?
Well, I really feel privileged to have the opportunity to spend this much time with you, because I know that as a writer, and you're also working a full-time job, that your time is extremely valuable. So I really appreciate it. Yeah. Have a great day.
Bye, Karen.
Bye-bye.